Coming up on Network Africa, a 24-hour curfew takes effect in Lagos State as government imposes a movement ban in light of the nationwide NSAS protests. Hoodlums set fire to a relay Gomu police station in Lagos State. Plus, one person killed after police in Côte d'Ivoire opened fire on opposition protesters. Thank you for joining us on the program this hour. I'm Layo Adegoke. A 24-hour curfew has taken effect in Lagos State here in Nigeria after the government announced it 3 hours ago. Now, this decision was made by Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who explained that it's as a result of the continuous NSAS protest across the state, which has become chaotic. According to him, I have watched with shock how what began as a peaceful NSAS protest has degenerated into a monster that is threatening the well-being of the society. Lives and limbs have been lost as criminals and miscreants are now hiding under the umbrella of these protests to unleash mayhem on our state. The state government adds that only essential service providers and first responders will be allowed to move outside this time frame. Meanwhile, the State Police Command has announced that protests under whatever form or guise is no longer allowed. The Police Public Relations Officer SP Olumuyiwa Adejobi says security agencies will be deployed to take charge and enforce the curfew across the state. All of this is coming on the heels of the latest attack on the Orile Gomu police station, which has been set ablaze by hoodlums. These are pictures from the metropolis where hoodlums have attacked the Orile Gomu police station, setting it ablaze. Sources close to the police command say there were attempts to attack the Ebutemeta police station also, but it was repelled. The acting head of Lagos Fire Service, Margaret Adesheye, also said they were unable to make their way to the police station owing to the gridlock. In the meantime, the Nigerian Senate and lawmakers are asking President Muhammadu Buhari to address the nation as soon as possible on the issues raised by the protesters. Now, the Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Naya Abaribe, in his contribution to the debate, maintains that an address by President Buhari to Nigerians on the issue of police brutality may calm the tensions in the country. He is also advising President Buhari to set up a judicial panel of inquiry made up of people respected by the protesters to address the issues raised. Furthermore, he is asking that the notorious 35 SARS officials identified as being notorious for brutality should face the judicial panel of inquiry and also face prosecution. Meanwhile, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, is appealing to end SARS protesters not to allow the agitations to be hijacked by unscrupulous elements seeking to cause chaos in the country. He made the appeal in an address to the House at the resumption of legislative proceedings for the week. The Speaker says the protesters have raised their voices for a righteous cause which has been heard, and it is now time to move the agitation from the chaos of the streets to a round table for discussions on the way forward.
As we endeavor to hold our nation's police to higher standards of personal and professional conduct, we must also make sure that we provide for the welfare of the men and women in uniform, to whom we assign such significant responsibilities in our collective interest. From minimum police equipment requirements through to training, everything must change. If we have to have a police force that meets our nation's needs and upholds the law of the land with integrity and professionalism. As Speaker of this House of Representatives, let me say now, for the records to reflect, and in the expectation that I will be held to account, I will not sign off on the 2021 budget that does not include adequate provisions to compensate those who have suffered violence and brutality at the hands of the police in Nigeria in the last decade. I will not sign off on a budget that does not meet the reasonable demands of the ASU, to which government has already acceded. To the young people across Nigeria who have led this protest, whose call for change has brought about this historical moment, you are the midwives of national rebirth. You have moved a nation to action, and now you must join in doing the hard work of making it real, the vision of a more just, more prosperous, and more resilient nation. We see your true cause. Please do not allow your righteous cause to be hijacked by those with base motives, who see in this moment an opportunity to pursue vendettas, to spread division, exploit the many existing fissures that exist in our society, and bring our nation to its knees. You have raised your voices and marched to demand a better Nigeria, from Abuja to Washington, to Calgary and London. Your voices have been heard. Do not allow anybody to convince you that to withdraw from the streets now is to concede defeat. This is the time to move your agitation from the chaos of the streets to the painstaking deliberations and strategic partnerships that birth policy and produce legislation.
At least one person has died and several others injured in Côte d'Ivoire after security forces opened fire during an opposition protest. The demonstrations come ahead of a controversial presidential election. Crowds of predominantly young people set up roadblocks in the southeastern town of Buona in protest at President Alassane Ouattara's decision to stand for a third term at the end of October. More than 12 people have died since August in clashes related to the election. Now, Mr. Ouattara's two main challengers, former President Henri Bédié and former Prime Minister Pascal Nguessan, say they will boycott the polls and have called on their supporters to prevent it from going on. Well, in Ghana, as the country prepares for its December election, 5 presidential candidates have been disqualified from taking part in the polls because their nomination papers included defective signatures and fake endorsements. According to an official statement from the Electoral Commission, the candidates have been recommended to the police for further investigation. The commission will refund each candidate their 100,000 Ghanaian cedi filing fee. Now, a total of 12 candidates have been cleared to run for the presidency in Ghana, including incumbent President Nana Akufo-Addo, who is seeking a second 5-year term in office. Move on to Somalia now, where the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble has retained key ministers in a new cabinet that he announced on Monday. The new cabinet includes a Deputy Prime Minister and 26 ministers that includes 4 women. Those retained are Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, and also the Health Minister. Mr. Roble also announced 17 state ministers and 26 deputy ministers, also replacing the former Prime Minister Hassan Ali Kaire, who was ousted in a no-confidence vote by Parliament on July 25th. The new cabinet is expected to get approval from the Parliament. While opposition supporters are celebrating in Guinea as the opposition leader Cellou Dalein Diallo has declared himself winner of Sunday's presidential election. This comes ahead of the official announcement of results by the Electoral Commission. Now, Mr. Diallo told journalists and his supporters that he had won the first round despite anomalies. However, the Electoral Commission says vote counting is still ongoing and that it is the only body mandated to announce the winner. There have been protests in the country for months following the decision by President Alpha Condé to run for a third term in office. Now, with just over 2 months left until elections in the Central African Republic, the United Nations Security Council is calling for a peaceful atmosphere as the political situation remains tense in the country. According to the UN top diplomats in the nation, some candidates are already questioning the viability of the peace agreement and even proposing to renegotiate if elected.
The EU will continue to be one of the strongest supporters of the Central African authorities and population in their efforts towards peace and reconciliation, democracy and recovery. To that end, we are mobilizing all our efforts, political, humanitarian, cooperation development, security and crisis management, including, as was mentioned, through a new civilian CLDP mission to contribute to security sector reform.
The United Nations World Food Programme, WFP, is warning that unless humanitarian access is urgently granted to organizations like themselves, catastrophic levels of hunger could hit hard in parts of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Communities in the far north of the country are isolated from crucially needed humanitarian aid. Severe hunger has increased dramatically. Around 11,000 people are suffering from famine in the far northern areas of Burkina Faso.
In a little more than a year, an insurgency has displaced more than 1 million people in Burkina Faso. Violence and insecurity has pushed 7.4 million people in the central Sahel region of West Africa into acute hunger. The number of internally displaced people have risen from 70,000 2 years ago to nearly 1.6 million today, including an over 288,000 in Mali, more than 265,000 in Niger, and over 1 million in Burkina Faso, which is now home to the world's fastest growing displacement crisis.
We believe that about 11,000 people now in phase 5 famine condition, and we don't have access to it. If we can get to them, we can not only save their lives, but we can also change their lives. If we can just get them here, then we can work with them to grow crops, and then they won't have to be dependent on outside help.
The ability of humanitarian organizations to deliver assistance to those most in need have been jeopardized by worsening conflict and insecurity. Meanwhile, aid workers are also increasingly targeted by non-state armed groups in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Meanwhile, aid workers are also increasingly targeted by non-state armed groups in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This means that needy communities are unable to access life-saving humanitarian assistance on which they so desperately depend on in times like this.
Just a year ago, there were 200,000 people displaced because of terrorist and extremist groups. Now it's over 1 million. These were people in an area that were already struggling in so many ways because of flash floods and droughts, and you can look at the land, it's a tough piece of land. And so we're working with these internally displaced people to rehabilitate the landscape so that they can not be a burden on the local community to host, and at the same time produce more food and take care of their families and sell in the marketplace.
WFP, the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, is urging participants at a high-level ministerial conference in the Central Sahel to find ways for organizations to engage with the communities and all sectors on the ground, opening up safe passage ways for humanitarian assistance to reach those in need.
Still ahead on the program. The United States is set to remove Sudan from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. We'll give you details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. U.S. President Donald Trump has said Sudan will come off a list of state sponsors of terror if it pays compensation of $335 million. Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok responded by saying the funds had been transferred, but there was no immediate U.S. confirmation. Sudan has been listed since 1993 when Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden lived there as a guest of the government. The compensation relates to Al-Qaeda Qaeda's 1998 bombing of U.S. embassies in Africa. The attacks in Tanzania and Kenya killed more than 220 people, and the compensation money is to be paid to U.S. terror victims and families. Now, that's according to U.S. President Donald Trump. Relations between the U.S. and Sudan have improved since President Omar al-Bashir was ousted after mass street protests last year. Mr. Bashir had ruled the conflict-ridden African nation for 30 years. Well, we have joining us now Naba Mohidin, VOA's correspondent in Khartoum, for more on this story. Thank you, Naba, for speaking to us. Now, what has been the reaction to this feat achieved by the Sudanese government? It has been 27 years since the country was added to that terrorism list.
Actually, the reaction is so big. People are so happy and optimistic that finally Sudan can be lifted from the SST list. At the same time, people are a bit disappointed because, as Mr. Abdullah Hamdok said, Sudan has already paid the $335 million. So people are so worried that maybe a new step or a new condition can be imposed by U.S. administration. So there is a mixed feeling between being optimistic of Sudan finally being lifted from the U.S. state list of states sponsored terrorism. At the same time, they think it's a new condition for U.S. And Sudan cannot pay the money right now, cannot pay because it's already struggling, and they want the lifting in order to have an access for the international funds. So people are a bit frustrated, and some political parties say it's blackmailing because Sudan has already paid the compensation funds.
The Sudanese government says it has met the conditions of paying this compensation to the victims, but the U.S. is yet to comment on this. Do we know when exactly Sudan will be officially off the list?
Actually, this is the question, and this is the worrying, because the Sudan government said it's already paid the funds, and U.S. is asking for more money. So it's a really wondering question. In the same time, the good sign of this is the tweet was, the language of the tweet was so clear that once Sudan is paying these funds or the compensation money, it will be lifted. So Sudan right now is gambling with paying the $335 million in order to be lifted, because it was a very clear condition. So nobody knows when exactly it will be lifted, but the condition was so clear. Maybe Sudan government will have this trend. Maybe Sudan government will pay the money in order to have no more conditions and to be lifted from the SST.
Now, with this latest development, what does this say about, the diplomatic relations between the two countries going forward?
Actually, it's the best. Right now, the diplomatic relation between U.S. and Sudan is the best stage or the best years, because this is a very big step and progression. The statement of Sudanese government and U.S. right now are dealing to make an end for the issue, not like before. Before, the former regime was challenging everyone and was daring the international policy. So right now, the diplomatic relationship between U.S. and Sudan and the recent talks and the visits of Bonview, it's really good signals that the diplomatic relation is going ahead, even if the lifting Sudan from SST list is not very close. But there is a very huge progression in the relationship between the two countries.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Naba Mohidin, VOA's correspondent in Khartoum. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Well, armed fighters have released at least 900 prisoners in Beni in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in the early hours of Tuesday. Now, according to the local mayor, among the inmates who have escaped from Kambai Central Prison are convicted militia members. However, some 110 inmates remained at the prison. The attackers are said to have been equipped with wielding equipments. Mayor Modest Bakwana Maha has blamed an armed group operating in the area for the attack, asking residents to denounce escapees who may be hiding in the city. Now, Ethiopian farmers are battling the worst locust invasion in 25 years in the country. Huge swarms of locusts have invaded farming lands, wreaking crops, threatening food supplies and the livelihoods of millions of people in the most serious outbreak in the East African nation. The crop-devouring insects have damaged about 200,000 hectares of land since January as the country struggles with food insecurity affected by the coronavirus pandemic. A single square kilometer swarm can eat as much food in a day as 35,000 people.
We have quickly moved both government and FAO. Over the weekend, we already brought 2 air assets that are spraying as we speak. Over 100 field teams are on the ground doing both survey and control operation, and additional aircraft and helicopters are on the way between this week and next week.
The biggest challenge now in the region is here in Ethiopia, and we are working on that together with our partners like FAO.
As we end the program today, an Egyptian woman is trying to keep a dying craft alive in her country. Afrodit Wazim is an Egyptian glassblower working around the clock in her Cairo workshop to revive the rare, intricate craft.
Juggling between the hot ovens at her workshop in Kalubir village and a posh store in upscale Cairo neighborhood, Afrodit Wassim is vowing to preserve the dying craft of glass blowing. To create the colorful glass orbs, Wassim stands for hours in front of ovens operating at 2000 degrees Celsius, but the artist doesn't mind the heat, saying her love for the craft motivates her to push on.
Personally, I feel so happy standing in front of the oven when I have a solid material, and in one moment it becomes soft in my hands and I shape it the way I want, and I make some very colorful pieces that impress anyone.
The 32-year-old studied applied arts with a focus on glasswork at university, but after graduation, she struggled to find a mentor in the male-dominated market.
I was told that women are not allowed inside the factory. You give us the design and we make it for you.
Undeterred, she decided to travel to Italy and get hands-on experience with glass blowers there. Her hard work paid off, and she now runs her own workshop, where she works alongside a few craftsmen to create elaborate pieces of glass.
I meet a lot of clients who can't believe that I do this work on my own. They think that I send the designs to factories.
Wassim says she is the only woman among the few glassblowers that remain in the country, where the traditional technique is replaced with modern technology and mass production. Many manufacturers find glassblowing time-consuming and costly, resorting instead to ready-made molds for their designs. But Wassim hopes she can play a role in protecting this craft.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.